Good afternoon, everyone. Today, joining me again, Bob Kudla from Trade Genius. I always refer you to talk to him about grand solar minimum crop losses at the end of my videos that I specifically talk about and show you crop losses happening across our planet. We wanted to sit down today, and many of you have asked, if we lose X percentage of a crop, how much will this increase the price going forward? So we want to look back into history to see how this is going to take us into the future. And today, I just wanted to cover 5 different areas on the planet that have experienced crop losses this year alone in the last 2 to 3 months, not being so much talked about in the media. But with that, Bob, you know our topic we want to talk about, so I'll let you go from here.
Yeah, okay, Dave, you want to fire me questions, or do you just want me to wax eloquently?
Well, one of the things was, one of the main questions I keep getting again and again and again, if we lose 3% of, say, the global corn production or the global soybean or the global wheat production, how much will that put price up?
Yeah, so we actually have
20%. How much is that going to be a difference in the increase in price? And if it's 50%, what's the increase above that? So there's different ranges and exponential increases.
Okay, so and I think because you and I live so far away from each other, I'll try to delay so I don't step on you with the question. So to answer your first question about 3 to 5% crop loss, we actually have data just in the last 10 years that tell us what prices should do. And so in the La Niñas that happened in 27-8 and also in 2010-11 is that we seen a spike in prices on a 5 to 7% drop in yield that basically doubled the agricultural commodity price of wheat and corn and sugar and coffee in the futures markets. Now that doesn't always translate into a doubling of prices at the retail level, because the component of food to what actually gets to the grocery store is not a 1-for-1, but it definitely will spike inflation and make things very uncomfortable. And we talked about this before. 3 to 5%, 5 to 7% yield drops are not unusual. They're in the variability, and there is a volatility in yields that if I could plug my video for a second, is that you can actually see it in a video I'm putting out later today that shows there is just natural volatility in prices that as a trader you can take advantage of, and you can see doubles and it reverses every 3 to 5 years. But the real question that you're really asking for is beyond that. That's natural, and that's painful. That will cause third world, what I would call emerging markets. I hate the word third world because these people aren't third world people. They just have economies that can't emerge, and is that they have food insecurity issues. And usually what happens is a lot of these countries are tied to the dollar, and it forces them either to abandon the dollar or forces our Federal Reserve to relent on the dollar strength and or raising of interest rates. And that usually causes, the other way around, it causes the dollar to start to struggle, and it causes them to have issues with the creation of credit. And so that causes economic dislocations. So if you start getting to 10% crop loss, it starts to get more geometric. And I think you had Mr. Casey on in terms of when he was talking about the grand solar minimum. When you had these 180-year cycles, which I think is the one we're going into. I mean, we obviously can go into the 400, 600-year cycles of the grand solar minimum, but let's walk before we run. You're looking at food prices that could be 3 to 4 times from a crop level, in terms of getting to the markets, which would absolutely double or 2.5 times the cost of food in the food budget. That would pretty much cause mass dislocation in just about every country in the world except what I would call the first order Western countries. And, you know, probably the Middle Eastern oil countries would be able to afford the food. And then if we get into your 400 to 600 year, you know, grand solar minimum, you know, you're looking, you know, from trough to peak, you know, we have data going back to basically 1300 to 1996 wheat prices that the English crown had kept meticulous records on, because that's how they got their rent. You know, that's a reason why the potato famine happened, a story for another day. So they meticulously kept the price of wheat on their ledgers. And, you know, from the low in 1294 to the high in 1850, the price of wheat went up 5x. And then once the sunspots were coming out of the minimum relented, the price of wheat fell almost 90% from that high. So we have, you know, data that tells us that the price of grains from a commodity level can rise 8 times. And if that happens, it's literally, it's basically world trade shutdown, because nobody's going to export their grain crop and cause their own populations to have starvation. And the people that can't grow the grains, I think you're going to see a lot of people die.
Yeah, so I wanted to go into that a little bit. At some point in the future, people are going to start hoarding and not delivering like we do in a regular delivery, either monthly, bi-weekly, or something like we see today in normalized regional or global trade. You know, just a single instance of what we saw with the vegetable shortages in Europe this year. Everywhere across Spain, their greenhouses failed, collapses due to ice and snow, hurricane-force winds, unusual cold events, and snow and ice events that wiped out mainly the entire vegetable crop across the Mediterranean. Even Tesco was unable to get supply in, and then they had rationing, which led to a single head of lettuce or a single amount of, it could have been tomatoes or cucumbers or fennel, and then it was not available anymore. So going forward, can we see this as kind of a model which could be something in the future? And that was a regional thing as well. We were just talking about getting supply into the UK over from Spain, and they ran out.
Well, you know, it's, you know, the food production now is highly integrated, and it's integrated across countries. So, you know, you can very easily see a disruption in the supply chain if people start to get really nervous about their ability to grow crops for their own population. So, you know, you look at, you know, and the U.S. is interesting, and in terms of, you know, as a nation, we're pretty unique because our country is broad, and it's also deep in terms of latitude and longitude. So, you know, we're going to have regions that are going to be able to support, you know, crops when other regions are going to have difficulty. But, you know, you have countries like Canada and Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and northern Western Europe, France and Germany, is that when these crop failures happen, they don't have the internal wherewithal to support. And what's really going to be interesting is that, you know, it's not a zero-sum game, in the sense that some areas that are really going to suffer during the grand solar minimum, you're going to have parts of the world that are going to be bountiful. And what people don't realize, you know, they only know the Sahara and the Sahel as just basically desolate desert. Well, you know, during these other minimums, those areas were prime grain regions. You know, there was a reason why the Romans, you know, were in Carthage and in Libya and in Tunisia and those parts of the world, because it was prime grain regions. There's a reason why Egypt rose to be a great power. You know, they rose because they were getting enough rainfall coming in to be able to support crop. Because as you know, when you go into a solar minimum, it's the jets move, and so the storms come down farther. Well, I shouldn't say down farther. They come in closer to the equator. So those areas are starting to get more moisture, and you'll see that, and you already see it in the Sahel. Those belts are greening, and so the problem is those people may not be too excited about having Europeans come in there or Chinese coming in there, growing crop and then putting it on trains and trucks and taking it back to their countries to survive. So, there's not an established infrastructure. So I see that there's going to be some great conflict in what I would call the Saharan and the sub-Saharan regions. And as you know, is that those areas are Muslim-dominated people, and I'm sure they're not going to be too excited about having Christian-dominated nations coming in and trying to dominate them for food. Especially with all the tension that's going on between those cultures right now. So I think it's more than just the ability to grow crop. I think it's going to be the political ability to grow and export crop as well, because I think there's probably, with the technology today, there's probably people saying, hey, you know what, we have a 2,000 mile long, 200 mile deep belt, 2,000 miles wide, that we can grow grain and pie feed the world, but there's no infrastructure there and there's no political will. And I'm sure the people aren't going to be too happy about being recolonized. So I think Europe's in big trouble. And I think, the northwestern areas of Europe and of Eurasia, with Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and France and Germany are in big trouble too. So, I don't have much experience. You look at Australia and South Africa, and they seem to do much better in when you have global cooling than they do when you have global warming, at least in terms of the rains. But I think it causes other issues because I think they get too much rain. But we don't have enough data going back in time because the people there were really hunter-gatherers during the last global solar minimums.
Yeah, we'd have to go into ancient legend, and that's kind of what a lot of Western studies have dismissed right away. It was a legend, but they're actually trying to pass down the traditions of these changes that we're seeing into a story form so it would survive through changes in the language. The story would be passed down. They actually knew what was going on. We just don't give them credit for that. But I do want to have one thing. When you said certain parts of the country will be able to grow enough to supply other parts of the country, specifically in larger areas like the US or the EU, we're talking about the floods in California that are flooding literally the entire northern part of California, the breadbasket, which is a predominant vegetable producer for the US. So if even 1/8 of that goes offline due to the levee breaches, the destruction of infrastructure, including irrigation canals, piping, etc., roads washed away, there's still a Pandora's box within a country that can also come unwound due to these huge fluctuations in the jet stream. I mean, what we're seeing now is literally just the first, the intensity. This thing is going to intensify for the next 5, 6, 7 years into, monstrously larger than what we're seeing today. So what do you think about that regionally? Like, if California loses its production, how will that affect prices in the US and et cetera? You see these different dipoles around the world where you can draw exact correlations.
Yeah, so let me talk about California because I live here. The region that's being affected right now, there's an interesting historical story I just read that when the Europeans first pulled into the Central Valley of California, Spaniards stayed up along the coast and put their missions in, and then you had people pushing in from the east. When they started to settle in the area, they saw all this great bottomland that was great farmland, and they wondered why the native peoples were not living there, and they thought they were stupid until they encountered the floods of 1880, 1890, and basically turned the inland sea of California, Sacramento, north to Yuba City, south all the way down into Stockton. They had actually ocean-going vessels that could pull all the way into the Central Valley of California. because every 200 years you get these atmospheric rivers. Isn't that ironic, Dave? Every 200 years, what does that tie into, right? You know, it ties into the 200-year cooling cycles, and it basically floods out the area. You're talking an area that's, you know, 100 miles wide by, I don't know, 200 miles deep. I mean, you're talking a huge area that's underwater. And that's not the only area that goes underwater. Down south by where Bakersfield is, there's a depression in the land where it before they dammed up all the rivers in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley, is that it turned into a lake. I mean, a lake 50 miles by 50 miles by, you know, 5 or 10 feet deep. And so when you have these atmospheric rivers now this year, you know, it filled all the dams. Well, these things don't just come in 1 year bursts. You know, if we get another year like this, it's going to overtop all the dams. And in Southern California, in LA, they had a year of 65 inches of rain. You had, there's 3 main rivers into the LA basin. All of them overflooded their banks by 4 miles each. You're talking 4 miles by 20 miles each. So you're talking 80 square miles times 3, 240 square miles of uninhabitable land that has homes in there now, Dave. So you're talking a disruption of probably 2 to 3 million people that can't live in their homes if we get another event like that today. Now, some of it's probably channeled now a little bit better, but you know, it's still going to be massively disruptive. And so what happens is that up in the Sacramento Valley, it's really grain like rice and cattle and straw and things like that. So it'll affect milk prices, affect rice prices. South of Sacramento is a lot of nuts. You know, I mean, not literally. I mean, I'm talking about food nuts, not the people nuts. They're that too, but they they grow walnuts and almonds, or almonds as they say in that area. And they export that. So that's a big export crop. Actually, it gets exported, a lot of it, to China and Japan. And so those will all go offline. And then when you get farther south, is, you know, it's grapes and other hard fruits. And then when you get even farther south, you're going to get more of a lot of the vegetables, carrots. And then, but south of LA and to the east of LA is the big salad belts. And then west of that area, which is getting hit pretty hard right now, is the salad capital of the world. That's Watsonville area. And so those are the salad areas. So, and right now, Monterey County is just getting absolutely just inundated. So I could see those parts going offline. And there's only 3 or 4 places where you can grow salads, right, off season. It's Monterey, it's down in the Imperial Valley, it's Arizona, Arizona is actually going to come out of this thing pretty good. South Texas. And in Florida. And so if those areas go offline, we're going to be relying on Mexico for our food. And right now we're pissing off the Mexicans. So it's going to be really interesting political dynamics, because they you won't be able to get food. Forget about prices, Dave. You just won't be able to get it. If those go offline, you know, we've seen strawberry prices go up 3-4 times when we had a cold snap here in LA a couple of years ago. And then once you miss the window, you know, it's 3 months, 4 months before they can put those back into production again.
Yeah, there'll be some lag, and you really have to ask yourself, will governments come together and help each other globally, or will we be holding these old grudges that we've had through history here, and it's like, well, you know, we're not going to get this now because this happened 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago.
Oh, now, there's no doubt.
I wanted to talk about quickly, just in South America as well. A lot of my subscribers are telling me down in Sao Paulo, again, where they lost 30-40% of the Arabica coffee bean crop last year, that this summer it's been incredibly cold, some of the coldest temperatures they've ever had during summer. So it just seems like it's continuing around the planet, continent by continent, in different parts. So you touched on coffee beans for just a moment there. And if you want to add that last thought you're in, I cut you off, please do.
Yeah, so I kind of lost that last thought, but South America, you know, which is really amazing to me how coffee prices have been holding. You know, I think they're probably switching out of Arabica into Robusta beans, but at some point that whole coffee thing's going to fail, and the historical precedent at least a double, and coffee demand is through the roof right now. And in Argentina is basically being drowned out right now. Their soybean crop has gotten hammered lately. So and what people don't realize is that probably you look at Argentina for soybeans and you look at Russia for wheat. Those are the marginal producers that created the bounty. And Brazil has a different issue. Sometimes they can produce what they need to produce, but the people don't have the credit. That's the other thing that people don't talk about. Food prices went down so far that a lot of these farmers are going under or are unable to get bank credit or to be able to get spotted credit to put their crop in the ground. And that's some of the reason why prices have fallen so far in the futures market, is that they have to get, and the bankers know this. It's why it's so frustrating to me that these guys have this unlimited stacks to do this. They're betting hard against the farmers to drive the price down so that they can get the crop extremely cheap. But at the end result, they're going to put farmers out of business, and they're going to take acreage out of production. And you're seeing that this year. American farmers are planting less wheat because they can't get the price they want. In Brazil, they're planting less corn because they can't get bank credit. So you're having some triple whammies here that people really, people play checkers instead of three-dimensional chess. They don't see the movements. So you have political risk, you have banking risk, and you have climate risk, and then you're going to have people. When you ask me that question about will people come together, I'm telling you absolutely they will not. They will not come together. People go to ground, and they're going to protect their own. I mean, just think about yourself, right? If you saved up a year's worth of food, right? You were prudent. You saved a year's worth of food, and your neighbors did nothing, right? And you don't know if next year is going to fail. Are you going to give all your excess to your neighbors, knowing that they're not going to do anything about it next year, and then have your crop fail and your family starve? I'm just talking human nature. I'm not talking you and me personally. That's how people think. And and there's people around the world, and I'll put my US hat on for a second. There are many people in the world, if the US had crop failures and other nations did not, they would absolutely use it to their political advantage to cripple us. And looking at the way our country's been acting of late, I see no reason why we would probably not act the same. And so I just think that people really need to think about what they're going to do personally to locally source and to be prudent about what they do, because I don't think there's going to be this worldwide kumbaya, let's all help each other. Locally and social media, we may want to try to do that, but the people that are moving the chess pieces around will have absolutely, if they have theirs, they will absolutely use it to their advantage to gain advantage over people. So I just see the Kondrativ winter coming, and climate is going to be, I think, the push. And just to tail on that, I was looking at food prices and stock prices, and they seem to go hand in hand. So I guess my view is that food price rises curtails the ability of central banks around the world to print money, because people a lot of people have to import their food. And so if they keep importing food with cheapening currency units, that doesn't help them, because they're not getting paid more in those units. And I think that stops the central banks, which then that credit cutoff then stops the stock market from moving up higher too. So these things all go hand in hand, and I think food leads it, and you can see it. My personal view, every 7 years, we've seen a major disruption in the stock market, and you can just tie it back to climate disruption on the cold side. You can look at 81, 87, 94, 2000, 2007, and in 2011, and we're due now again, is these were major climate disruptions from cold spells. All of them stopped the stock market. And so, to me, that statistic, that correlation is too high to just be an interesting piece of data. I think that's something that people should get their head around. And so, and you can start seeing it here in the U.S. We're starting to see at the retail level, food prices starting to sneak up. I have a subscriber, from my service. He's a former executive, and he watches this stuff very, very closely. And he said, "Hey, it's the first time I've seen an uptick at the retail level in the price of foods that we buy." So it's sneaking in. They've already reduced the packaging size. They can't do that anymore. Now they're going to have to start passing these costs on, and people just won't have the wherewithal to be able to pay it. It'll be substitution, and it'll be disaster for the economy.